Welcome back to America's Forum. J.D. Hayworth here, Miranda Kahn in the middle, and former NBC News correspondent Ike Seamans here at the anchor desk. Joining us via Skype, Alina Hernandez, the managing editor for our parent company Newsmax. Alina, why don't you pick up the questions for Ike?
My question is, what would make a decorated journalist, someone who has certainly earned his stripes in the field and behind the anchor desk, what would make someone come up with these stories, make up stories like this?
First of all, let's examine decorated journalists. Brian Williams was not ever a network news correspondent in the field before he came to NBC. He came from local news as an anchor. He went to MSNBC as a host. That's what they were looking at him for. Make it clear, I never worked a story directly with Brian. We were friends. We talked. I know him well. When he was named as Brokaw's successor, the comment was made by the president of the division, we got to get his boots dirty, meaning we got to get him out on stories. But here's the problem. When a network anchor moves into the field, he moves with an entourage of best producers, best crews, which I mentioned earlier. These people help him. These people also know what he is and what he isn't. It was pretty well known that, and this was Brian, the Iraq thing was his first combat zone. I'm almost positive of that. He'd never been before. In his first report, he made it very clear, and it's on YouTube, that he was not on the chopper that got hit by the rocket-propelled grenade. He got pictures of it, but he wasn't on it. He later embellishes to say that he was. And so he was not like a Dan Rather who paid his dues in the trenches, or a Tom Brokaw. These guys, or a Cronkite, these guys did it down at the lowest levels in the trenches. Brian never did. So in my opinion, and I've said this publicly, he was a wannabe hard news correspondent who really wasn't, and now he never will be. Taking nothing away from his ability as a journalist. He just had never done this before until he did it in Iraq and other places, but with the best support team that the network had to offer.
Yeah, we had talked earlier and you said you had heard basically NBC execs refer to Brian as, we need to get his boots dirty.
That quote was made by Andy Lack, who was the NBC president at the time, on a closed circuit telecast to all of us in the NBC bureaus. It was a popular decision. He is a wonderful man. He's impossible not to like. But Andy's quote was, we've got to get his boots dirty, and that means get him out in the field. Let him talk to the world leaders. Let him see combat. Let him see these terrible things. And that's a good thing. But you shouldn't, as he did later, for example, years later, in 2007 at Fairfield College, also on YouTube, he said, I looked down the barrel of an RPG. I was an Army officer. I wasn't in Nam. I fired every weapon there was in the Army. If you look down the barrel of an RPG, you're dead. An RPG will blow a chopper out of the air. The one it hit, by the way, didn't explode. The hole was as big as this desk. Why would he say these things? Why? He wants to appear braver than he is. And this went on and on. Why didn't someone stop him? The producers knew the truth. Probably they didn't want to get involved. Anchormen are untouchable. They do and say whatever they want. Nobody challenges them.
It's been called the God complex.
Oh, no question.
And mindful of that, now the decision by NBC brass, Ike, we've got about 2 minutes remaining, a 6-month suspension without pay. Is this just to kick the can down, or is he such a ratings grabber, has been heretofore, that they're going to try to bring him back and see if he can recapture that ratings magic at least?
I think there's some truth in that. I think they're in a position of they're not sure which way to go, but there's a lot of truth in that. There's also a lot of truth is if he does come back and goes on and the ratings drop, he is gone. He is history.
What do you think needs to happen?
They have to change the network anchor star system. Yes, because why should a news anchor, if I'm doing a story in Iraq and the anchor shows up, I'm what they call big-footed. I'm out. I'll go out and get the story and give it to him, and he does the story. He's a news guy. I'm a news guy. We should all be equal. But that system, making him God, is what, and everybody, and I'm talking about the top executives, are afraid to challenge him. He can do and say whatever he wishes. And that's been true of every anchorman going all the way back to Cronkite, Huntley, Brinkley, and that's the culture. That needs to change.
Ike, 30 seconds. Jon Stewart is leaving The Daily Show. There was talk that Deborah Turnus and NBC wanted to hire Stewart for Meet the Press. What does that portend?
In the current atmosphere of television news, where entertainment and news, the line has been crossed, why not? When you watch him, they call what he does fake news. I don't consider much of it fake. He's pretty right on a lot of things he says. Look, that's the culture.
But it is a satirical take on the news, and as we've seen with a multiplicity of outlets now, a point of view is something that is perhaps here to stay at the anchor desk. Ike, we thank you, and we thank Alina, and we thank Miranda. All of them are coming back later in the program. Tom Hutchinson next to talk Money Matters. Welcome back to America's Forum. We are so pleased to be joined on the anchor desk, Miranda Kahn and Ike Seamans, former NBC News correspondent, and via Skype, Alina Hernandez, managing editor for Newsmax.com. Folks, we're going to talk Cuba. And Ike, you had a unique experience in your days in TV news getting into Castro's Cuba. Tell us about it.
In 1977, a basketball team from the University of South Dakota was going in. Your old field politicians, Senators Aberesk and McGovern arranged it. No reporters from South Florida, local, television or print, had been allowed in since 1960 when Castro said no more journalists. Networks have been going in, but not local. I was friendly with Aberesk. He called me up on a Friday night and said, if you can get in here on a charter, I've got your permission. So in 1977, a cameraman and I from WTVJ Miami became the first local South Florida reporters, print or television, to get into Cuba in 17 years. We came back with a 20-part series that really was a sensation in the Cuban community in 1977 for what we, and it wasn't just pablum. We did everything. We slipped away from our handlers. We showed all the good stuff and bad stuff. And then I did the same thing with NBC, and then in '96, 3 times in Cuba, I've been denied permission to come back because they didn't like that kind of reporting. And in 1996, after the Pope's visit, I didn't cover I went down, I didn't cover the Pope. I went in and covered poor people, no food, blah, blah, blah. And after that, they said, you will never be permitted back into Cuba. So I've had a little experience there, and I know Alina knows much more than I do, but I was very proud at the time that I went in there, and the stories and the way they were received in South Florida.
You know, I'm curious, do you think that there's going to be any significant change now that the Obama administration is essentially handing an olive branch to Cuba?
Well, I think that really depends, Alina, frankly, on the Cubans. I mean, Obama has gone a long way, but you know, so that remains to be seen. But there's one thing that's not being talked about when they talk about improved relations. We're always saying with the embargo, the embargo. One thing that really needs to be talked about is the Cuban Adjustment Act. That was installed in, I think, 1959 to permit Cubans to come out who were in mortal danger or political persecution. That was not unique. It's been done. That was done for Vietnamese. It was done for Cambodians. It was done for Nicaraguans. It gives you a lifeline to get out of a horrible thing. But the other adjustment acts had a time limit. After a few years, they said, okay, that's it. The Cuban Adjustment Act has gone on for all these years, and that is a real bone of contention, particularly in Congress, as you know, with those who are not familiar with the South Florida experience. So, Alina, until they can, that's a real bone of contention, and that isn't even being discussed in the national media now, and until that's resolved, to me, the embargo is a philosophical problem.
And a lot of Cubans have been really upset about the president's decision, and yet some politicians, Republicans, have actually supported what he did, saying the embargo didn't work.
I have a question for Alina. Sure. Alina, may I assume you are a Cuban American, correct?
Yes, I am.
All right. I used to think years ago, 10, 20 years ago, that they would change with the, we're on the 3rd generation of Cuban Americans now, who I call American Cubans, or just Americans. I used to say, well, I'd talk to younger Cubans, the second generation, and they were still saying, absolutely, we're not going to do anything. I think in this case, I'm seeing some give. Do you feel that Cubans of your age, and particularly younger, the college-age generation, are they more tolerant of this type of thing now, or have they adopted their parents' point of view?
Short answer, Lena, about 20 seconds.
Sorry.
Absolutely. I think it's generational. I think the younger you are as a Cuban American, you are far more willing to open up the doors and see if we can do something different. The older you are, the more recalcitrant you are. It's just, it's definitely generational.
Generational, demographical, and controversial.
And still a reporter.
Well, it's great to have Ike
Yeah.
Seamans in. We hope you'll come back to visit Ike. And Alina, we look forward to having you back. And America's Forum will continue here from Newsmax TV right after this timeout.